Elliot David, what's going on? Thank you for joining on this episode of the Bitcoin Source. Can you give the audience a brief introduction of who you are?
Sure. And I'll say, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Dadu. Really a pleasure being here. A little bit about myself. I'm Elliot David, born and raised in New York. After high school, went to the military, a little bit about my sort of trajectory. But when I came back to the US, I came back to New York. I was originally studying astrophysics and cosmology. So you might be asking, what the hell is a sort of astrophysicist doing in the Bitcoin space? I was studying astrophysics, cosmology for a bit, and then recognized the urgency of climate change, how it intersects with a lot of these other problems that I wanted to solve. So I pivoted. I'm still very interested in all things space, but I started doing a lot of work in energy, sustainability, climate, bounced around between the nonprofit, public, private sector. Did some time at some nonprofit organizations, worked at the U.S. Department of Energy briefly. This was during the Trump administration under Rick Perry's tenure. And then I went to go work for the Clinton Foundation. So, as you know, probably one of the youngest people, if not the youngest person, to work for both the Trumps and the Clintons in the energy space. And then after that, I moved to China. I was a Schwarzman Scholar at Tsinghua University. While I was there, I did clean energy transition research with David Sandalo, who is, former Clinton, Obama climate advisor, assistant secretary of energy, assistant secretary of state, sort of a, world expert in the clean energy transition. And then when I left China, I got really interested in, what are some of the enabling technologies for the clean energy transition? Because we have the money, we have the tech, we know it's an existential issue. How come we haven't gotten there yet? And so I've had this kind of seasoned energy background for, coming up on a decade. And then I was introduced to Bitcoin. So while a lot of people come into the Bitcoin space, either from a financial perspective, financial inclusion, sort of freedom, liberty, political philosophy, I was just an energy guy. And I first saw Bitcoin as this really novel sort of physical and digital infrastructure that could enable the clean energy transition, improve the grid when it comes to resilience, be good for energy justice. And that's when I was brought onto the Sustainable Bitcoin Protocol. It's been a very exciting year or so working with the team. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Great. I did see that you mentioned that you worked for Clinton and the Trump administration. So my question that I want to pose to you is, how has the current administration been helpful or hurtful in the client literacy connection with Bitcoin?
Sure. And I'm sure your listeners are already familiar with sort of the Bitcoin and the narrative around Bitcoin as being this, dirty asset class. Some people go so far as to say that it's boiling the oceans. It's going to alone, blow past the 2-degree carbon budget. And I look at that from a couple of different perspectives. The one you just mentioned, right, political perspective, I think that while climate shouldn't be a partisan issue, most things end up becoming very partisan. And wherever we can, we should take partisanship out of issues. And there's a very interesting sort of overlap in both progressive and conservative ideology when it comes to Bitcoin. But I would say historically, Democrats, progressives they've tended to have a better track record when it comes to climate. I don't think this is necessarily because our inherent values are different. Rather, thinking about climate change and addressing environmental challenges means you apply a different set of assumptions to economics. That's really all it is. Who doesn't care about a healthy environment or, clean air, clean water, which is how, conservatives or Republicans tend to sort of frame the issue as like, yeah, sure, we want clean air, clean water. How do we do that? And so when it comes to economics, and I'm an economist by training, you have to assume different starting points for how you think about problems. In sort of interventionist policy, you think that the government has a role in deciding what's valuable, what's not valuable, as opposed to a hyper-liberalized market where sort of let markets do as they may. And inherently, I think that government or sort of central authorities are going to have to play some role when it comes to fighting climate change. To get to your question about the current administration, I would say that so far they have a pretty solid track record when it comes to addressing climate. I would consider myself pretty activist, so I think they could be doing a lot more. And I can get into a whole host of, why I think Bitcoin should also be a part of this climate strategy for the administration. But I think one of the things that I really do like is that the Biden administration, or federal policymakers writ large, is that they're starting to recognize they don't have enough information on Bitcoin in order to regulate it. And so, Biden and the OSTP, that's the Office of Science and Technology Policy, they had that request for information. They're trying to sort of gather as many expert opinions on the topic as possible. We've worked with a bunch of really great organizations to provide some of those comments to the administration. I think they want this to be a climate science-led initiative instead of, I would say, some New York policymakers have this kind of ban first, ask questions later policy. I would say that on a federal level, they are seriously thinking about this. They also know that you can't stop Bitcoin, right? So in the case of New York or China or North Korea or whoever, if you end up banning this practice or putting some sort of definitive limitation to it, it'll probably move elsewhere. And the U.S. definitely doesn't want to do that. So at this point, I'm pretty confident that when their report comes out in August, that it'll be pretty positive. I would say that the executive order Biden put out previously was already pretty good. But again, we'll see. Like I've been surprised. I've been wrong before. But I do think that the current administration is asking the right questions. Of course, a lot of education needs to go into this. But yeah, I would say I'm pretty bullish on the administration's approach to climate policy.
And, I just want to kind of backtrack a little bit and actually talk about the company that you're involved in, which is Sustainable Bitcoin Protocol. Like, I found the company very profound, so profound that I actually wrote a piece about the company and what you guys are doing for ESG mandates and how you're trying to make Bitcoin mining more sustainable. So, like, if you could just give people a quick, concise background on Sustainable Bitcoin Protocol, I think that'd be really helpful for people to know about that company.
And we haven't been around for too long. We've only been around for a year or so, which I guess in Bitcoin land is a pretty long time. We have this deep background in sustainability and energy. Max Song and Brad Van Voorhees, the two co-founders, before they brought me on, this is sort of their early thought process, but they were looking into different strategies for decarbonizing Bitcoin as an asset class. And they were working with folks like Jihan Wu, who's sort of, an OG in the space, and thinking about how do you enable institutional adoption, which is still very slow. If you think about the number of sort of institutional investors and asset managers that have adopted Bitcoin or are diving into the space, I think we're just sort of getting into that wave now. And this was before Elon tweeted and, sent the world into chaos about, Tesla and ESG. But they were thinking about how do you enable behavioral change across the network, right? In something like a consumer good. So like I have a mug of tea. If I wanted to, I could have some sort of certification to say that this mug of tea is sustainable, it's eco-friendly, it's recycled, what have you. But for something like money that has to be fully fungible, that any two assets, like a dollar bill, they have to be exactly worth one another. They have to be equal to each other. You can't compromise the central tenet of fungibility. And you could think about dollars, right? Like I carry cash in my wallet. For all I know, that money was used to finance, the sale of illegal weapons or, drugs or whatever. I don't know what my money was used for. And I think that's also really important for Bitcoin, right? You need that fungibility asset quality to it. So some of these folks, like, Kevin O'Leary has suggested, what if you buy Bitcoin from a carbon neutral or sustainable source and then just hold it in your wallet forever? In effect, that would make it sustainable. But at the end of the day, that in a way disrupts the fungibility because now I'm designating this Bitcoin as always going to be held in my wallet. So early on, Brad and Max were thinking, how can we address the sustainability issue of Bitcoin without compromising fungibility? And looking at other sort of similar problem sets, they looked at power markets. So when you look at the grid, electricity, like Bitcoin, is also fully fungible. The electrons that are powering our computers right now, they might have come from a gas plant, they might have come from solar. It's impossible for us to tell. And so the powers that be developed what's called an attribution market for electricity. So I can buy electricity, and then I can also buy the sustainability of that electricity or the environmental attributes and make a claim. So you might have heard of this concept called a REC. So I could be buying, a company, let's say, could be buying electricity, and then they could also be buying RECs to basically address the sustainability of that electricity. And so we developed an instrument called a Sustainable Bitcoin Certificate that has a similar function, but although improved, and I'm happy to go into why, but a similar function for Bitcoin. And essentially the way the protocol works is you have a clean energy miner. They go through a verification process to determine, how sustainable are they really? And also happy to dive into what that looks like, because obviously sustainability means different things to different people. But let's say they're a solar powered miner. They're using, green electrons, and they are not currently being rewarded for that sustainable behavior. What they would do is they would join the protocol, go through the verification process, and then when they win a block, they would be awarded a requisite number of SBCs. And what's unique about SBCs is that there will only ever be 21 million SBCs. Each one is divisible by 100 million. So similar, a perfect pair with Bitcoin. We're actually calling our subunits Kyotos as sort of an homage to Satoshi and the Kyoto Protocol, which is the first major carbon market sort of international agreement. And essentially what this does is it puts a premium on sustainable mining practices. So, we're not punishing anybody. We're not interfering with the market. We're basically awarding sustainable behavior, right? We are giving credit where credit is due. You can often think about ESG and sustainability as, are you getting what you're paying for, right? So in ESG, if a miner is making a claim to sustainability, essentially we enable them to do that in a verifiable and very profound way. And the reason why this is valuable is because the world's largest institutional investors, asset managers, the Fidelities, BlackRocks, Goldmans of the world, they need to comply with their own ESG mandates, but do it in a way that preserves fungibility, in a way that doesn't really cost them money, right? Or I should say in a way that it's not a cost center. So what they can do is then buy these SBCs from these Bitcoin miners, hold them on their balance, along with their Bitcoin, and then have an assurance of sustainability. You can essentially, it's really the first on-chain representation of sustainable mining practices in the world. And the reason why this is so important is because, again, it's a market-driven mechanism that just incentivizes, it rewards miners. And one of the reasons why this is separate from, let's say, a REC is because an SBC is also an appreciating asset. So rather than being a Bitcoin miner and trying to purchase a bunch of poor quality carbon credits to address your carbon footprint, you could instead be issued SBCs, sell those to an institutional investor, and obviously make money, which I think in the current market is a pretty good idea for some of these miners that want to diversify their revenue streams. And then if you're an ESG investor, instead of basically paying for carbon credits, something that's retired immediately, an SBC accrues value over time. It's rather than paying for sustainability, you're investing in sustainability. And I think that's at our core of why our value proposition is so great. And in addition to that, it actually encourages behavioral change across the network. So we often talk about how Bitcoin miners are increasingly using clean power. This is a way for them to do that in a verifiable way, and it basically maximizes that positive incentive. So to your earlier question about about the sort of the framing of Bitcoin as a dirty asset, or a lot of the misconceptions around it, this is a way not just to sort of tell the story and change the narrative around Bitcoin, but this is the way to actually do it. This is the way to actually make Bitcoin the world's most powerful climate positive asset class in existence.
I think a lot of people cast aspersions about Bitcoin, energy consumption, And then there's also, the media, the news that kind of pushes this fear, this uncertainty, this doubt. And my question to you is like, and you kind of explained it very well, but I really want to know more about like partnerships and having like a stamp of approval. So like the SBCs, and to my understanding, seems like you're giving these institutions a stamp of approval that they have clean energy and it's backed by something like a token, which at first I was kind of sketched out about being a Bitcoiner. But once I saw that you have the same supply as Bitcoin, it does a lot of the same processes, I was like, ooh, this is different. This is a company I've never seen this before. And I think that is super, super interesting. So my question is like, your partnership with CleanSpark, for example, how do you think partnerships like that will help change the narrative around FUD and energy consumption in conjunction with Bitcoin?
And I guess just first to address the first point about, being Bitcoin first, right? Which is what we are. Like, we're not, we accept all the criticisms about having an alternative token and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, like, our success is tied to the Bitcoin network. At the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is maximize adoption and really unlock the full potential of Bitcoin. So that's why we also say we do not touch the Bitcoin network. We are not, tracking Bitcoin, or we're not violating fungibility. We're not trying to sort of promote an altcoin or a shitcoin or whatever. At the end of the day, the purpose of our protocol is to maximize adoption and to develop the Bitcoin network in a way that disabuses the notion that Bitcoin is bad for the planet, when in fact, you can alleviate energy poverty, accelerate clean energy transition, bridge the digital divide, and unlock financial inclusion for billions of people. So that's really our, if you're a miner and you care about sustainability, we're great for you. If you're a miner that just, wants to be, you want to sort of improve your bottom line, we're also great for you. We're not choosy in that sense. In terms of our partnerships, there's a couple of different stakeholders as part of this ecosystem that help us do what we do. First is the institutional investors and asset managers, which actually create the sort of market, whether you're an ETF or you're an exchange or whatever. That's sort of the demand side of an SBC. But then on the supply side, there's us. There's a few other sort of stakeholders that I think are relevant to mention. One is this energy verification piece. So in existing markets, if you are consuming something like hydro or nuclear or even like waste methane gas, right now, even though you might be doing something very sustainable, there's no market to price that, or there are limited markets to price that. So what we're actually doing is developing a methodology with some of these really phenomenal organizations, which I believe we'll be announcing soon, but including one of the world's leading nonprofits that verifies clean energy claims for the likes of Google, Microsoft, Facebook, or I should say Meta, and then another organization that does hour-to-hour tracking of carbon intensity on the grid, so we can have real-time emissions data for these Bitcoin miners and then appropriately attribute their consumption. So that's the verification piece. The miners themselves, such as CleanSpark, which really phenomenal partner. And for your listeners who don't know, they're sort of a large NASDAQ-listed sustainable mining company. And what's also interesting is they're really a clean energy company that does Bitcoin, which I think that's going to really help them. It's already helping them be very successful, especially in this bear market. So groups like CleanSpark, and there's a couple of other mining partner announcements that we have in the pipeline. But it's a no-brainer for them, right? If you're a miner that is, using fossil fuels or is sort of not working in line with the most sustainable practices, like, we're happy to work with you, but we don't have as much of a benefit for you, right? Or I should say, at least we our sort of maximum value proposition, value add to your organization is not as significant as if you are a sustainable Bitcoin miner, right? That is directly consuming clean power from the grid. But it's been really phenomenal working with some of these miners that are obviously securing the network. And they're very supportive of what we're doing. We've had a couple events where we're working together. We have some in the pipeline as well. And for them, it's like they want to also change the narrative on Bitcoin, right? I think at the end of the day, the ESG question or sustainability, some consider it a vector of attack on the network or on the asset class. I see it as an opportunity to prove to the world like what Bitcoin can really do. So if Bitcoin can unlock billions of dollars of new capital for clean energy development, then I think all the naysayers will shut up pretty quickly. So that's on the mining side, and then a fourth sort of stakeholder group that I didn't mention is the world's leading nonprofit organizations, climate science organizations, NGOs, academic institutions that are working with us to develop these best sustainable practices. Because we also think at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're led by climate science, we're working with the experts, and something novel that we're doing is actually saying to them, like, we want you to help govern this protocol. And there's a few organizations, again, hopefully we'll announce them soon, but there's a few organizations that are really leading climate nonprofits and academic institutions that are interested in this issue. They recognize it's part of the public discourse now, and they're starting to see it as an opportunity to promote energy justice, to advance the clean energy transition. And a lot of my work with the protocol has been engaging with these various environmental organizations, and not just educating them on what Bitcoin is and what it can do, but also like how we could work together to achieve these climate goals. So in New York, for example, with the CLCPA, it's the Climate Leadership Community Protection Act or something like that, which is basically the state's climate goals. There's all this controversy around banning Bitcoin mining or proof of work mining or fossil intensive, proof of work mining. But really, Bitcoin, I see, can be a way to unlock the vision of the CLCPA. It could be a way to actually accelerate decarbonization across the state and provide clean energy for a lot of these communities that have been historically impacted by fossil fuels. And so that's why we're working with some of these really amazing nonprofit organizations, academic institutions. So each of these stakeholders is important in what we do.
Yes, most definitely. And, I think that Sustainable, they're very intelligent with their business model, because for me, for example, I went on the website and I looked at everything with a fine tooth comb, and I'm like, okay, they have a problem that they're going to solve, and then they're going to provide a service for that problem. And I think that, the miner for a Bitcoin protocol is like sitting on the honeypot, right? It's that's where the original Bitcoin is coming from, where it's being sourced from. And, your company coming in and kind of finding a way to modify that to be in conjunction with mandates for environmental science, climate change, and you're giving an incentive for the investor that wants to invest into this company, into climate change, into Bitcoin. I just think it's a triple threat. And I think that this company is going to be very, very successful in the future. And I'm looking forward to see more from Sustainable.
Yeah, you heard it here first. We're gonna not just change the narrative, but we're actually going to change the world. There's a lot of, Bitcoin at the end of the day, and this is also maybe helpful to some of the folks listening that are, new to the space, new to Bitcoin, is, some people see it as like a cult. Some people see it as, digital gold. At the end of the day, Bitcoin is code. Bitcoin is code and electricity, right? And when you put those two things together, it's a technology. So thinking about Bitcoin as a technology, as a neutral technology, by the way, it doesn't have an agenda, it doesn't have a marketing team, it doesn't have a PR team, it doesn't have a CEO. At the end of the day, there's a digital and physical infrastructure, which is what we're addressing. And then there's this social infrastructure as well. Learning about Bitcoin, right? Understanding why it exists. It's helpful to understand. Why did the financial crisis happen? How does the grid operate? The more you see some of these problems that we face as a society, whether it be financial exclusion, energy poverty, or anything, Bitcoin can solve all these things. We just have to sort of nudge it along. And it's helpful to think about it as a neutral technology that really is in our hands. So whether we use it for good or for bad or whatever, that's up to us. And so really the way I see our work, and this is me speaking, not, SPP, but I see I see our work as being paradigm shift. It's that is really our sort of our agenda. It's how do we help to transition the physical and digital infrastructure, and then thereby change the social infrastructure of this network? Because there's a lot of debate today about, toxic maximalism or diversity in the space. Like, these are all issues that, it's on us. It's incumbent on us to fix, because we're the people that cause these problems. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's like problem solution. How do we put those two things together? That's the way I think about it. And we of course really appreciate your positive review.
Of course, I've been in the Bitcoin space since 2017, so I've really been looking to see the changes and the growth and how there's new businesses popping up. And I also have a question too, where do you think that the Bitcoin mining companies will change their day-to-day operations to kind of fit into Sustainable's model? Because, sometimes they can be finicky or they have their processes in place. So do you think that Sustainable will make it easy for Bitcoin miners to kind of onboard what you guys have going on for your protocol?
Sure. It's mixed, because no two mining companies are the same, right? In terms of, does the protocol create any kind of change with the companies themselves? Absolutely. But I think for the better, right? For one, a lot of these companies that are currently making sustainability or environmental claims, whether it be through the Mining Council or through any other mechanism, they don't have a way to verify this. And, really interesting concept when it comes to the grid, electricity, environmental attribution, is that most people or most companies are Bitcoin mining first, and then they think about the energy side of things, which I actually feel they should flip that around, right? If it's an electricity native asset, you need to be an electricity focused company that uses Bitcoin, right? Or that produces or mines Bitcoin. And so one of the really interesting trends is that now even the mining companies are starting to see how important it is to understand these attributions, especially as it relates to sustainability. So if you're a Bitcoin miner, let's say you're a Bitcoin miner, right? And you want to plug in some rigs at a solar facility or a wind plant that has tons of excess electricity that's otherwise going to be wasted. What many miners fail to understand is actually there is the electricity that they're consuming, there's the power that they're buying, whether it be through a PPA or some other kind of mechanism, and then there's the actual environmental attribution that happens in a separate market. So unless you're owning, whether it be REX, GO, IREC, whatever it is, unless you're owning that attribution, you can't make a claim to the sustainability of that power. So you could talk to a miner and you'll say to them like, hey, I understand that you think you're consuming clean electricity, but technically you're not. And they say, what the heck do you mean? Like, I could see my rigs right here next to the solar plant. And you have to explain to them that the power producer has actually sold, and this isn't in all cases, this is in some cases, but they've actually sold the environmental attributes of that power elsewhere. And so sometimes what you'll need to do is actually go back into the market, back into the REC market, purchase RECs, and then retire them to get issued an SBC. So to answer your original question about like what does it take for a miner or what does it look like for them to actually join, it depends. If you're a miner that's already using clean electricity, that is already basically already consuming clean energy in line with the most sustainable practices, the most sort of up-to-date methodologies, it's easy. Like, we onboard you, you get issued SBCs, you're making more money. Like, it's so simple. If, let's say, you're a miner that's using a grid mix and, you need to go through a verification process and it's a little more, there's a little more footwork that needs to get done. It's still very simple. It just means it's more work for me, but we're happy to do it because at the end of the day, it's really driving that behavioral change. One of the really interesting sort of like social changes happening in the space as a result of the protocol is some of these mining companies we're working with, they're now saying to themselves, okay, we need to hire somebody focused on sustainability, or we need to embed sustainability into our business practices. And what I think is so incredible, and this is going to be a total like middle finger to the TradFi or these other industries, is like it's almost like a self-regulation, and we're starting to build in sustainability into the core of all these different companies, and they're doing it because they know at the end of the day it's going to be best for them. It's going to be best for their bottom line. So whether you're a methane gas miner that is now thinking about how do I make sure I'm not encouraging further fossil fuel development, or if I'm a miner that's using mostly nuclear or solar, and I want to make sure that I'm actually, I'm getting verified claims of clean energy the same way that, the likes of Google and Microsoft are doing. Like, this is a real, again, like paradigm shift. That's what we're doing. So for the miners, it's a no-brainer, and yeah, I would say that's kind of how we interface with them, and that's the reaction that we're seeing from them. So sometimes you have to go through a little bit of, I would say, like a learning process, and then of course verification. But for the most part, it's pretty simple. And we're also about to go through our first pilot transaction, which will be the first time this has ever been done in history, which we're pretty excited about. You heard it here first, and yeah, it'll be a great, I think, day in sort of the Bitcoin environmental movement.
I agree. And, Bitcoin is, a digital monetary network ruled by and run by electricity, like you said. And I think that, you're not pontificating when you say this is going to really change the world and change things for people across the planet, which leads me to my next question, which is energy justice, right? Where do you foresee the Bitcoin climate change movement going and getting disenfranchised and underserved communities to better understand energy justice, and not only better understand it, but use it to their benefit to help out the neighborhoods and communities most affected by it?
And I love this question because this is really where I eat. This is my interest in the Bitcoin space. This is really what sort of brought me into the company and into the movement. Energy poverty or energy justice is, in my opinion, the golden thread that connects everything. So in the sustainability space, we often think about, the UN SDGs, the sort of myriad of dimensional problems that plague humanity. And having clean, reliable access to electricity can solve so many of them. Everything from like alleviating, education disparities to gender-based violence to water quality to transportation, everything, right? And the way I think about this energy justice question is in a few different sections. I think about it, one, in the United States, and I also think about it, more broadly across the world. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about in the United States first and then go into sort of the macro conversation. But in the United States, what many people, at least in sort of coming from a more privileged background, fail to understand is that there are people in the United States who don't have access to electricity. We do not have 100% electrification. Beyond that, the number of people who want access to clean electricity that's not polluting their air and water that don't have it's like abysmal. We're not exactly leading on this area. And so, again, in the context of this question about like what can Bitcoin do, a lot of the reason why these communities don't have access to clean electricity, because we have the tech, we probably have the supply, but if you're a Black or brown community in, I don't know, in the Southeast or in the Northeast, and you want access to clean electricity, but you've been historically plagued by a gas plant or a coal plant that's polluting your air and water, one of the reasons why that plant, or the main reason why that plant hasn't been replaced, is economics, right? The environmental health and safety of people is not often priced into grid decisions. So just to take one example, let's say you're a community that's being impacted by a gas plant, or I actually have a great example. How about you're the Navajo Nation in New Mexico, and you've been besaddled with all this fossil infrastructure that the U.S. federal government essentially forced you to use, but no clean energy company, no solar or wind company is going to come in and help replace that because of this curtailment issue, right? It's not economically feasible. An energy developer is going to want to get as much money out of as much of a return on investment in a project as possible. And the way you really do that is to have constant sale of electricity, right? Your listeners probably know that solar, wind, hydro to a certain extent are intermittent and they're not baseload power. So what do you do at the peak times when demand can't meet supply, right? And actually, there's one company called Luxfolio that I think acquired Westblock, and they actually worked with the Navajo Nation to help them transition to cleaner energy sources, and they're sort of a partner of ours. But they're not only helping the Navajo with their financial independence and digital inclusion, but also helping them transition to cleaner energy sources, which is going to have compound effects on their health and their air, their water. It's going to sort of drive systems change across the community. And that's a story that we can replicate across the country. There are a lot of communities that want access to clean electricity, but simply because of the grid, because of economics, they're not able to access it. Which brings me to the protocol. And your listeners might be asking themselves, hold on, what about the 19 million Bitcoin that have been historically mined? How are we going to look at that? Plus, how do we think about a Bitcoin that was mined in 2009 with, my cell phone using a kilowatt of electricity versus a Bitcoin that's mined today in 2022 with 365 megawatt hours, so a factor of thousands more? How do you equate the two? And the reason why we want Bitcoin to be a climate positive asset, and the way we're able to do this, is for the historically mined Bitcoin, we're using today's the present consumption of the network as a benchmark for going back into the market and buying RECs. High quality, surgical, targeted RECs, where we can basically say, hey, these are the areas of the country, these are the areas that need the most investment in clean energy development. So to get issued for SBCs post facto, you would go into the market, buy these surgical RECs, and obviously all of this will be transparently displayed on our platform. You can see, how big of an impact we've had in Montana or West Virginia or Alabama or wherever, how we're supporting clean energy development in underserved communities. And you could drive that investment while issuing SBCs. And why I think that's so important is because the success and growth of the network is tied to its sustainability, which is then also tied to this new investment in clean energy development. And just rough numbers, in our first year, we could easily deploy more than $25 million of new capital towards clean energy development through our protocol. And then over the course of several years, this could reach billions. We could enable through Bitcoin, take that traditional finance, but we can enable billions of dollars of new climate finance going into clean energy development for the communities that need it most. So that's energy justice in the context of the US. And while we're focusing mostly on the US for now, there's this other piece across the world, right? And just for context, I was recently in Rwanda, where I met with a lot of leaders from across the continent, talking about digital assets, talking about Bitcoin and clean energy. And one of the things I think the Bitcoin community really needs to start paying attention to is how do we actually make it accessible to everybody? Like, Bitcoin is in theory supposed to be a financial inclusion technology. It's supposed to be open and available to everybody. But there are 3 billion people on planet Earth today who do not have access to the internet. There are billions of people who don't have clean and reliable access to electricity. So how can you purport to be an open and accessible technology if almost half the planet can't use it? And to their credit, I think the Bitcoin community, and there's a lot of really amazing folks, like Alex Gladstein and some of these other people that are, really trying to, and there's a person in South Africa, I think, like, there's all these really incredible people and initiatives that are trying to educate and make Bitcoin accessible. But at the end of the day, if you don't have this physical and digital infrastructure, it's not going to be helpful to you. I was speaking with one of the ministers from the Central African Republic, and he told me that only 1 out of 10 Central Africans has access to electricity and the internet. And of course, as you know, they recently decided to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. So why would they make this decision knowing that only 1 in 10 people can access this technology? And he said to me, because he knows that if the success of the Bitcoin experiment is tied to their success, that it's going to enable investment, it's going to incentivize, digital inclusion, financial inclusion. And just thinking about this for your viewers, but the global South, right? The South in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, South and Southeast Asia. These are the areas of the world with the highest renewables potential, lowest renewables penetration, with the exception of Latin and South America, the lowest rates of digital inclusion, and the lowest rates of financial inclusion. Bitcoin can solve all this. So I was speaking with some of these ministers from across the continent, whether they be from Kenya, Nigeria, and they think it's incredible. They can use Bitcoin mining as a way to incentivize further deployment of clean energy, which, by the way, all the materials are for clean energy, physical clean energy goods they all come from the African continent, right? These are all critical minerals that are basically mined, brought elsewhere, and then we in the US get to benefit from it. But this is a way for them to also like decolonize the clean energy transition. It's a way for them to decolonize their money and address these multidimensional problems of energy poverty, digital inclusion, financial inclusion. And so while, again, SBP is focusing on the North American market, I think the long-term future of Bitcoin looks like this. It's a future where we've alleviated energy poverty, digital exclusion, we've promoted financial inclusion for all. And it's just really exciting to have those kinds of conversations. So that's what I think about in the context of energy justice. That might have been a long answer to your question.
No, I think it's like, honestly, I've been saying this since I wrote the piece about this company. I was like, I've seen a lot of energy plays. I've seen a lot of people talking about it, but like, I'm really excited for this company because it's just doing things so differently. And like the way that you're elucidating on how this protocol is going to change the world, me being first generation, my parents being from Africa, that means a lot to me too, to hear these things because, that's the future. That's where all the potential is. That's where all the natural resources are. I mean, you talk about like Tesla or the Apple company, mining coltan from Africa. When you talk about these things and you think about Bitcoin and how Bitcoin can actually fix a lot of those issues where we have this mass consumption for technology, this mass consumption for power in, first world countries, we don't really think about people in the diaspora. We don't think about people in third world countries. So I'm really excited and grateful to hear that sustainable is their long-term view, hopefully, in conjunction with Bitcoin will be getting into these areas, teaching them how to mine clean, efficient energy, and also how to learn about Bitcoin to have as a form of sovereignty and financial enrichment. So I really appreciate it.
And again, like SBP, we have a pretty specific mandate for now. We're a relatively early company. But I think adoption, right? Global adoption is in everybody's best interest. And another really interesting theme that I witnessed while I was in Africa, while I was in Rwanda and sort of speaking with all these different leaders, is that most of these countries officially have banned cryptocurrency, banned Bitcoin, right? Even hubs of innovation like Nigeria, where like basically everybody is learning about Bitcoin using, like everybody is really deep in the space. Officially, it's banned. And so I always started these conversations. I was talking with somebody from South Sudan, well, like one of the ministers, and I was like, why is this technology banned across all these different countries? And he said, it's because we don't know what to do yet. So really, it's a placeholder policy. And I think all of these countries are going to have like, it's not going to be like dominoes. It's going to be like a wall of bricks falling down on the ecosystem. I think they're all going to start adopting Bitcoin really quickly. Like they're all investing in their Web3 workforces. Governments that have banned Bitcoin are often offering blockchain engineering training to their citizens. I'm probably going to head back to Rwanda at some point this year and meet with the youth minister about like workforce development and how do they build out their ecosystem. South Africa, I was talking to one of their major telecom companies, and they have a ton of clean energy capacity, and they have constant blackouts. Like their grid is a total mess. So again, like I'm not one of those people that thinks that Bitcoin is gonna, solve everything. It's a perfect technology. It fixes everything. I think it can do a lot of these things, but it really depends on how we as humans that are the architects of this technology, including Satoshi, who was probably a human, it's really going to depend on how we leverage it. And you could think about it like nuclear. Like nuclear energy can be used for immense good. It can be used for immense bad. But so I'm really excited. And again, this is sort of my call to action for everybody in the audience is like, what future do you want? And how can you use existing systems or new systems to get there?
Yes, most definitely. And on that note, Elliot, tell the audience what's the best way for people to get in contact with you, and also like what you have planned for sustainable.
Sure. So we have a big stakeholder ecosystem. So if you're a Bitcoin miner, if you're an investor, whether you want to invest in SPP or you want to purchase SBCs for your ETF or your fund or whatever, if you're a Bitcoin miner that just wants to add to your bottom line, reach out to us. I would say, we have our website, which will probably be updated soon. You can find me on LinkedIn. I think especially if you are somebody who cares about climate, sustainability, or interested in clean energy, sort of the clean energy transition, especially if you have thoughts, right? Like at the end of the day, we want to build this thing where it's not we decide what's best and then everybody else has to listen and do it. Like we really truly want this to be grassroots and emanate from science. So if you're a climate scientist or somebody with expertise in environmentalism or clean energy, definitely reach out to me. You could find my LinkedIn or my email in the comments below. Not sure how that works, but just reach out to our team. We are open to everybody. We're also very welcome of criticisms. So if you think we should be doing something differently or we're doing something wrong, I think the only way to maximize, pardon the language, but maximize the potential of Bitcoin is to welcome and encourage criticism. I think, sort of the more we ask these critical questions, the stronger the network and the community will be, whether they be environmental, social, or from a governance perspective. But yeah, if you want to learn more, maybe give us a follow on Twitter and LinkedIn. And if you're interested in, if you had specific questions or if you wanted to connect with us, just reach out to me. I'm open to everybody. And I hope to hear from you.
Once again, I have very, very high hopes for this company. Thank you, Elliot, for taking your time out to talk on the Bitcoin Source. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you.